Week, welcome to Metropolis. But is it the future or 2018? Whatever the year, what hope for the workers? What hope for the country? Class activist Faiza Shaheen thinks we should only look to one leader who has yet to reach his peak.
The mediator between the heads and the hands must be the heart. And Jeremy Corbyn has a heart big enough to unite our divided country.
As the courts continue to turn on Brexit, Liam Halligan rounds up the political week.
They may be turning, but the proletariat still doesn't know the final destination. And neither, it seems, does the ruling class.
If robots and Maybots are the future, could humans have reached their expiry date? I'll be asking Kathy Lett.
Well, Andrew, I haven't passed my use-by date or my am-use-by date, but the This Week machine definitely has.
Yes, the end may well be in sight. The apocalypse is nigh. It's time for This Week. Evening all, welcome to This Week, a week in which there emerged a policy around which I feel we can all rally. During yesterday's Prime Minister's questions, a Tory backbencher asked the Prime Minister if the government could make it easier to send people into space. In these difficult and divisive times, that's surely something which should command a broad consensus. The only problem would be drawing up the shortlist, though I sense there would be wide agreement on starting with the Tory and Labour front benches, with the Speaker and Vince Cable being allotted places in the cheap seats. I fear, of course, that this is all fantasy, as likely as Ken Livingstone becoming the next chief rabbi, and that we're condemned to interminable debates on the relative merits of 57 varieties of customs union. But I live in hope. Speaking of those with no hope, who should have been shot into space years ago, I'm joined on the sofa tonight by the Pinky and Perky of late-night political chat. A double act that struck fear into audiences from the Glasgow Empire to the Hammersmith Palais, and they're not that popular in the Paddington all-night steam rooms either. I speak, of course, of Michael Choo Choo Portillo and Liz 4% Kendall. Welcome to you both. Michael, your moment of the week.
The extraordinary cancellation of the summit with North Korea by Donald Trump. It was an extraordinary idea that it should occur. It seems to have been handled by both sides with incredible lack of diplomacy and incompetence.
What a surprise.
The North Koreans did not send a delegation to Singapore where they were meant to be talking about the arrangements.
Yes.
The Americans raised repeatedly the comparison between North Korea and Libya. In the case of Libya, General Gaddafi was first ousted and then murdered, which is not the future that Kim Jong-un sees for himself. And then North Korea responded by calling the vice president stupid and ignorant. So really, you just feel that this thing could have been saved if anybody had wanted to save it. The fact that North Korea was willing to do it in the first place, I suppose, means that they're feeling enormous pressure and that they do actually want to do a deal. So it's not necessarily dead.
But the Nobel Peace Prize isn't looking too good at the moment, is it? That room that Mr. Trump's made for on his shelf, probably. Maybe just put another bust of Winston Churchill there for the moment.
Listen, the bizarrest things happen and you shouldn't bet against them.
Well, that's true. Well, Mr. Obama got one for doing nothing, so who knows? Liz, your moment of the week.
Today's report from the IFS and Health Foundation, which sets out the huge scale of extra funding that the NHS and social care need. I mean, not to hugely improve, but just to keep on an even keel. 4% real terms increases for 15 years for the NHS, the same for social care. We are now faced with the biggest choice, I think, of our generation, how we're going to fund those services for the future. Theresa May should have accepted the offer of cross-party work because there are no simple solutions. I'm afraid she hasn't, but many of us in Parliament are determined to come together and come forward with a long-term plan.
Well, we're going to come back to that in a moment, but thank you. Now, he's been snubbed by Stormzy and Roger Daltrey in the same week. The polls aren't great for him, nor were the local elections. So no more, ooh, Jeremy Corbyn? Maybe, or maybe not. Stormzy is an uber-trendy grime artist, has declined to perform at the Labour leader's Glastonbury-inspired music festival. Tickets are still available. But that's because he had a prior engagement, he said, and he's still a fan. Former Who frontman Mr. Daltrey, who clearly hasn't faded away, he isn't a fan. He said Dear Jezza was masquerading as a socialist when he was really a communist. The 2017 Corbynista Summer of Love now does seem a long time ago, and the popular phrase among Corbyn critics in and out of the Labour Party is that we've passed peak Corbyn. But have we? Or when you look at the problems assailing the government from all sides, are Jezza's best days still ahead? Faiza Shaheen is from the Centre for Labour and Social Studies. This is her take of the week.
Politicians and pundits are turning the heat up on Jeremy Corbyn, suggesting that Corbyn mania is on the wane. They're wrong. Just as the Tories are enduring a slow burnout, Jezza and the team are warming up for the next Labour surge. People point to the local election results as evidence that we've reached peak Corbyn. The truth is, we made progress, and we would have been in even better shape had we nipped the anti-Semitism scandal in the bud and campaigned on the big issues: public spending cuts, ailing infrastructure, and the plight of young people. The party's chances were also blown by the centrists. On the doorstep, voters told us that they liked Jeremy and they liked last year's manifesto, but they weren't impressed by new Labour councillors who they saw as in the pockets of greedy developers. This disconnect between the local and the national cost us dearly. Rather than labouring over what the local election results mean, Labour needs to come together and strike while the iron's hot. From the Grenfell disaster to the Windrush scandal, from the collapse of Carillion to our rip-off railways, our economic system isn't working. Notably, on all of these issues, Jeremy Corbyn has been consistent, he's been principled, and most importantly, he's been right. Crucially, Jeremy Corbyn has the flame of the youth, the vote of the future on side. Whether it's student fees, the housing crisis, or workers' rights, Labour now has the policies that resonate with people that want to create Britain anew. 11 years into our never-ending financial crisis, our zombie economy, which breeds all manner of social ills, needs rebirth. Labour offers a new economic and social system which smashes and replaces our current inhumane one that is disintegrating before our very eyes.
And thanks to Peter Layden London Glassblowing in Bermondsey for use of their open studio and gallery. Faiza joins us now. Welcome to the programme. Now, I see you didn't mention that Mr Corbyn's personal ratings have plummeted 33 points since December. Why not?
Well, I mean, the video was talking about where we are as a party as well. And I think, you know, the thing that we have to remember that Corbyn and Corbynism is about more than just the man, and it is about the movement, the ideas, the change of a system.
But is Mr Corbyn personally past peak Corbyn?
You know, the thing that we found in the election last year is that the more that people see of Corbyn, the more that they like him. And what didn't happen...
So why have his ratings fallen by 33
Well, people
points?
haven't seen him as much in recent times, and I do think some of the anti-Semitism scandal and that discussion has, of course, hurt the Labour Party, and that, you know, dealing with that and tackling that is important going forward.
Take the party then. Labour is up against a weak and divided government. It's been in power for 8 years, and governments are usually pretty unpopular after 8 years, particularly during 8 years when real wages have been stagnant. Mm-hmm. So why are you still behind in the polls?
Look, I think there's a few things. People talk about sort of peak Corbynism, but Tories have also plateaued, and I think that they're really struggling now. You know,
but no, I can think of no time in mid-term with a government that's been in power for so long that's actually ahead of the opposition in the polls. Normally you would expect the opposition to be 10, 15, 20 points ahead. At one stage, Mr Blair was 30 points ahead of the major government.
Look, I think there's a couple of things here. One is that Brexit has changed the conversation somehow, and people aren't paying as much attention to some of the specifics about what parties are saying on those things. And I think actually, week by week, we are seeing the Conservatives' policies play out in a way that is making them look worse and worse. So I think that will.
So why is the lead in the polls gone up? It was neck and neck.
Yeah, I think it is starting to play out. What Labour is trying to do now, Labour is trying to do now is to offer a very different set of proposals, and that takes time. So, you know, people talk about their local elections, and of course we would have wanted to do better, but we are on a continuum, and you know they did do better in some places. They're still having that conversation.
Well, just before I bring Liz in on this, you mentioned the local elections, which are way more important than the polls because they're actual elections. That Mr Corbyn did worse in the local elections than either Michael Foot, Neil Kinnock, or Ed Miliband at their equivalent local elections. He's done worse. And neither of these three ever became Prime Minister.
Look, I'm not going to say that we wouldn't have wanted to do better, that the Labour Party wouldn't have wanted to do better at the local elections. They did make headway in areas, and that conversation needs to be had. We were taken away from some of those big messages around public spending cuts, around what we would do instead, that played out really well during the general election. So I don't think we should read too much into these local elections. I think there is a much bigger job to be done going forward
you brought them
now.
Up, not me.
No, I mean, we're talking about them.
All right, let me bring Liz in. Are we past Pete Corbyn?
I mean, the honest answer is I don't know. He has clearly inspired many people, including young people. One of the issues I think he will face coming up to the final votes on Brexit is that if we end up kind of facilitating a Tory or hard Brexit, that is going to turn a lot of the young people who are inspired by him away. That is a real concern that I have about that issue.
Look, Brexit is a Tory-owned issue right now. We have to make sure that we continue to shine the light on what an epic mess they are making of this. And of course, Corbyn and the Labour Party have come out to say they support the customs union. Again, Corbyn has been out talking about that Irish border and how important it is. We have just not had any clarity from the Conservatives at all. So to say that young people are somehow going to move towards not voting Labour because of Brexit, they're certainly not going to vote for Conservatives given what they're doing.
I think that's right, but I would like us to be clearer on what we think about the single market.
But you just said if Labour was seen to side with hard Brexit, that would put off a lot of young people. Yeah. Now you're saying that's not, if I counted you, now you're saying that she's right.
Clear on the customs
you can't
union.
be right and she can't be right at the same time.
What I said was we have been clear on the customs union.
Right,
but when we face the vote about whether we want to stay in the EEA, I think it would be a big mistake for us to block that because many young people were angry about what's happened on Brexit and they want to see a clear alternative from Labour.
Michael, the government could collapse over Brexit at any time. Mrs May has never really recovered from her terrible election campaign. Many of Mr Corbyn's policies are popular, from rail nationalisation to getting rid of student fees. So you couldn't rule him out, could you, as the next Prime Minister?
Oh, no. Yeah, you definitely couldn't rule him out. But from the Conservative point of view, I remain quite optimistic. Pfizer listed a number of things on which they're campaigning. But to complain about things that are going wrong is not the same as to make people believe that you have a solution that is better. Now, let's just take student fees. Of course, the abolition of student fees is popular with students. It's not necessarily popular with other taxpayers. I mean, here we are talking about the crisis in the National Health Service. Lots of people will not think that the priority at the moment, with limited resources, is to reward students rather than to put that money into the National Health Service. And we're talking about billions and billions of pounds here. It's very well to moan about Carillion, but what is the solution? It's very well to say we don't want spending cuts, but then that means you've got to have tax rises. And let me tell you, because I really believe this, that I think the vast majority of the population who go out and work, and yes, they've had stagnant wages, that doesn't make them keen on paying more taxes. And they don't believe in this fantasy world in which all the taxes are going to come from Google and 1% of top paid people, because the money just isn't there. And by the way, the people who are in that category are mobile, they just moved to other countries. So having a list of things you moan about is not the same as convincing people that you have a better idea. And particularly when John McDonnell goes around saying he wants to overthrow capitalism.
Pfizer?
Look, I think the heart of here is this issue about fiscal policy, is about spending, which you've touched on there. There has been an epic lie, a myth that has been told over the last decade that because of the crash caused by bankers that we had to pay. Actually, it's very, very important at that time when private investors don't want to invest anymore. They're unsure about what's happening in the economy, as they are right now because of Brexit as well, for the state to step in and invest. We need that regional investment. And so I think, when we talk about how Labour and Corbyn's project can do better, we have to be pushing back on that narrative. We need to have a new story. And it's not just about moaning. It's not, right? There's vision, there's ideas. That's why people could tell us the manifesto.
Can I tell you the principal myth? The principal myth is that Labour Party policy, Corbyn policy, is to allow people today to live way beyond their means so that young people and young people's children will pick up the debt in future.
This is completely
wrong. So
wrong.
those future generations are going to pay massive amounts in tax.
This is completely
to pay
wrong.
the interest on the national debt because we're consuming it today. We're now at 86% of GDP, our national debt. If we go on like this, we'll be at Italian levels. And
Michael, you wouldn't deny that our infrastructure, skills and housing need substantial extra investment.
Look,
that is an investment for our economy to grow in future.
I wish for it too. But money doesn't grow on trees. Everything has to be balanced.
Well, all the deficit's now being spent on infrastructure because the current budget's balanced. So the £40 billion deficit is all infrastructure. That's where the deficit is now.
But
so the argument is how much more do you need, and therefore how would you finance it? And that's a very legitimate argument to have. But to give us a flavour of what you're proposing, where can we see Corbynism in action?
I think there's some action in places like Preston, the Preston model.
No, I mean internationally. What countries have gone down the road you're advocating?
I mean, I think it's really interesting that when people looked at the manifesto last year, they said, well, this is what Germany's already got, right? In a lot of ways, we have countries with green investment banks, regional investment banks that put money back in, that invest. They borrow money to invest in infrastructure, then that pays back.
But these are
social
capitalist
and physical
countries.
Infrastructure.
These aren't socialist, these are capitalist
No,
countries.
I find it really
so where is
interesting, this weird
Corbynism where is it in action?
But look, every model is a hybrid.
Venezuela.
Every model is a hybrid. I don't see this weird distinction between capitalism versus
if
socialism.
the British people are to go down this road, when Mrs. Thatcher offered them something very different, essentially America was the model. We could see what a more market economy looked like. We had examples of that. Or the German social market economy was another example. Where can we look to see what it would look like if you had your way?
So where we see stronger trade union rights, where we see a state not scared to invest, we see that in we see that in Denmark, we see that in Sweden, we see examples of that around the world.
And these are market economies, these are capitalist economies. You've said you want to replace the capitalist economy with something else. So where has that happened?
Look, I think there's this weird line of questioning that's happening right now.
Why?
I don't believe that in order to have a very different system in which the incentives are very different, where we don't have, 1 million plus people on 0-hour contracts, where we don't have a situation where people are working hard day on, day out, and they're not earning enough money, where we have more children in poverty now.
But you've gone back to the situation
households.
here. I'm trying to get you to tell me where should we look to see where it's better. For example, Germany, which is now less of a market economy than us, there are a lot more people on 0-hour contracts there.
What I'm trying to say is that we need a hybrid. So I don't think that we have capitalism or socialism. I think we've gone too far one way in which we've built the incentives to always focus on profit.
I think
and we need to bring that back.
It's very important that we show that we believe in a market economy, but with the right rules, regulations,
but you don't believe
and
in a market
incentives, because there is.
You don't believe in a market economy.
I think there's elements of the market where it works, but I don't think we should be scared to have an active state, and that's what happened.
But you want a socialist economy.
Yes, I do want a socialist
that's not a
economy,
market
but that's
eco-
not.
but that's not a market economy.
That's not in every sector. That's not how it works. We're not saying that we're going to bring Greggs into public ownership.
Isn't it all a bit academic? Because Mr. Corbyn is not going to go away, and even if he was to go away, he'd be replaced by someone who broadly believes in what Mr. Corbyn believes. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Good. Then we can end it on agreement. And you would agree with that too, wouldn't you?
Yes, because there is demand for something that
yes,
looks
it's
very
fine.
different.
We ran out of time. Yes, it was fine. See, I've managed to bring the moderate wing and the left wing of the Labour Party together. I mean, I'm wasted here. I think Kofi Annan's job is the someone I
Nobel
should be doing.
Peace Prize.
We already bonded.
There is now room for a Nobel Peace Prize, you know. There's a by the way, on that point, North Korea, I've just seen, has announced that it is still ready to meet America if they can put this particular show back on the road. So we shall see. Now it's late. The Donald's golf buddy late. Yes, only a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of weeks away from the presidential visit to the UK, diplomats are still scrambling to find a celebrity or sportsman who's prepared to partner POTUS at golf. You don't play golf, do you, Michael? Probably just as well. Now, the Prez wants to extend his visit by a day to play golf in Scotland. Why wouldn't you? So far, there's not exactly been a stampede to partner him. Many seem to think that a date with the Donald is strictly for the birdies. Someone who's never short of company is writer Kathy Lett, who's putting sell-by dates under the spotlight. Now, if you'd like to swing a few of your asinine ramblings and amblings towards me into my bunker, well, feel free. The Twitter, the Fleecebook, even Snap Numpty are at your disposal. And I promise to respond to them with all the speed and enthusiasm of a Home Office team examining Roman Abramovich's visa application. Now, Boris Johnson found himself the target of a hoax call this week. The hoaxers quickly hung up, however, concluding that they'd got the wrong number, because there's no way this guy could be the British Foreign Secretary. The Tories' very own Queen of the North, Ruth Davidson, told her own party, and by extension the Maybot, that they were a joyless, miserable bunch. Now, you know you've won the Glumbucket Stakes when you're being told to cheer up by a Scot. The Maybot was reprogrammed with a new little ray of sunshine algorithm to counter Miss Davidson's harsh criticisms and exclaimed, "How wonderful!" at the Chelsea Flower Show, when presented with a cowpat that had been lovingly brought to London as part of a display of the Yorkshire countryside. Clearly, this new software requires some fine-tuning. Here's economist Liam Halligan with our roundup of the week.
Yes, I'm at the location, somewhere outside the M25. What, this week's been derailed? Andrew's done a runner? A job for Challenge Liam. So it seems the government's made a hash of the new rail timetables. That sounds like a job for Challenge Liam. Time to get this show on the road. Oh, the rails.
What we've seen in the last few days hasn't been good enough. No one should underestimate the logistical challenge of introducing a timetable change. A number of things have gone wrong, but most particularly, for the second time in 6 months, Network Rail were far too late in finalising the planned timetable changes, and they have left the rest of the industry struggling to catch up.
Is this the way to Amarillo?
Oh, Choo Choo Portillo's been lobbying as usual. It seems he wants a non-stop sleeper service scheduled from this week to Amarillo. I guess that's where he gets his shirts. It seems the government's got a few signalling problems on Brexit. The bill for that max fat custom system. It's a runaway train.
You need to think about the highly streamlined customs arrangement costing businesses somewhere in the late teens of billions of pounds.
Time for Tony the Tank Engine to steam into view. Again. We're 45 minutes from a second referendum.
Anne-Marie who waits for me.
If we say we want a jobs-first Brexit, that means we stay close to Europe's economic area. If people then say, well, what's the point then of leaving? You say, well, then the final decision should be taken by the British people if they want to proceed on that basis.
Is this the way to Amarillo? Every night I've been hugging my pillow, dreaming dreams of Amarillo.
So that's the timetable sorted up. And here's my next challenge. Yes, it's inevitable. It's Britain. It's the summer. We're talking trains. It can only be leaves on the line for Labour's Barry Gardiner.
Which Barry Gardner's the truth? The one that speaks in private or the one that's on television now?
Look, sometimes you have conversations in private, OK? And the reason they're held in private is because you can advance thinking and you can actually then try and if all you ever do is stick by the given line, you'd never actually advance things because you'd never discuss anything with people. But that's the reason for holding things in private.
It'll take more than the wrong kind of snow to stop our Barry. But at least someone's sure what should and shouldn't stay private these days. Not. This was the week when Michael Gove compared himself and Ruth Davidson to rock legends Ike and Tina Turner. He must have left his judgment in the sidings. So is the UK economy finally picking up steam? Stocks and shares are like a bullet train, the FTSE 100 at an all-time high. And news of lower inflation means no interest rate rises for now. A positive statement then from conductor Mark Carney. No, I thought not.
Real household incomes are about £900 per household lower than we forecast in May of 2016, which is a lot of money. Now, the question is why and what drove that difference. Some of it, and we can't be absolute about it, but some of it is arguably ascribed to Brexit.
The inquiry into the Grenfell Tower tragedy heard from family and friends of victims this week, and a BBC Panorama investigation found that the insulation covering Grenfell Tower didn't pass required safety tests.
Leave absolutely no room for doubt. We must learn everything we can about what has happened, and we must take the strongest possible action to stop such an unimaginable tragedy from ever happening again.
Well, I've got some tickets, but we're missing a conductor. What's that? Ah. Auditioning for the role of Fat Controller, John Burko faces calls for police investigations into allegations he bullied colleagues and staff.
The government chose to schedule a major transport statement on an opposition day, thereby substantially reducing the time available for opposition business. Having expressed my displeasure about the matter quite forcefully from the chair, I used the word stupid in a muttered aside.
One journey that's definitely reached the end of the line is Ken Livingstone's service to his beloved Labour Party. The former London mayor quit, saying that claims he was anti-Semitic were distracting from the leadership of his old pal Jezza.
Rather than this drag on for another 2 years, it's better for the Labour Party if I just resign. And all this does is just distract attention from Jeremy's leadership of the party and the options he's giving Britain.
Jeremy Corbyn turned up the heat on the Tories, saying that NHS privatisation is hurtling down the track.
NHS budgets have increased by just 1% per year under this government, but it's jackpot time for the privateers. Their share is up by 100%.
Theresa May hit back, saying it's not all aboard for the private sector in the NHS, at least where the Tories are driving the train.
I have to say, last year the proportion of spend in the NHS in England outsourced to private sector did not go up at all. There was somewhere where it went up 0.8%. Ah, yes, Wales.
Wales? What's that? The birthplace of Anneka Rice? I've never heard of her. That one's for you, Michael. Nice shirt.
What a train. The Audley End Miniature Railway are hoping that Liam won't be back soon. Our thanks also to Don't Panic, It's Challenge Annika. It's on at the Bunker Theatre. Now, Michael, Mark Carney, Governor of the Bank of England, he says on the basis of the bank's forecasts in 2016, I think May it was, on that basis, British households from Brexit, from that referendum, are now £900 a year worse off. What do you make of that?
Well, I'm afraid I don't trust anything that the Bank of England says because it's got so many things wrong and because it is so very partial on the subject of Brexit. So I'm pretty sceptical about it.
For the governor to be right, his forecast would have to have been right. Something which we'll obviously never know. But on the basis of his other forecasts, you wouldn't bet the mortgage on it, would you?
I mean, forecasts are often wrong, to state the obvious. I think he is right to raise concerns about the downsides of having a weaker pound, of the lack of business investment because of uncertainties over Brexit, the impact that's having. And, you know, my concern about the economy isn't just about those Brexit-related issues, but the real lack of focus on the longer-term problems that we've got on productivity, regional inequalities and low pay.
If the pound were a concern, then Mark Carney would be largely responsible for it. Every time the pound perks up, he goes out there and says, we're not going to raise interest rates after all, and the pound slumps again. So if that's part of the concern, he's the author of the problem.
But are you concerned about the lower than expected growth at the end of the last year?
Growth has, I mean, it may be revised, but at the moment we're working on 0.1% growth in the first quarter.
No, I don't think there's any surprise that, given that we don't know where Brexit is going, that might reduce the growth rate of the economy.
But we don't know where Brexit is going because we can't get clarity from the government.
Exactly.
So the government must take some responsibility, perhaps more than some responsibility, for the slump in the growth rate.
Especially when the world economy is growing
I want to
strongly.
separate two things. I think the uncertainty over Brexit may well have a deleterious effect upon growth. I don't think there's any proof that Brexit will have a deleterious effect upon growth.
Why have we got such a big drop in foreign investment? Why are businesses in this country not investing, which we know is essential for productivity and growth? Because of the uncertainty.
Because no one knows where we're going to be.
And that's the government's fault, as Andrew says.
No, I agree. I'm not saying it's not the government's fault, but I'm saying it's distinct from Brexit itself. And by the way, if the government is uncertain about it, so is the Labour Party, as we perfectly well know.
But the government is the government.
Of course, absolutely.
The boss of HMRC, we saw him there, he says that new technology and procedures on the border, this max fac, this jargon which nobody understands. Anyway, to be able to have a seamless the border, even with Brexit, could cost 20 billion, though it did seem to me a bit of a back of a postcard calculation.
It did.
But what do you make of that?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't start from here, as the Irish say. And to say as the Irish say is probably the right place to start because this is all about Ireland. And the British government has managed to allow itself to be convinced that the Irish issue has to dominate the entire Brexit policy. And this suits, first of all, the British civil service that never wanted to leave the European Union in the first place. It suits the European Union, it suits the Irish, and I think it's now beginning to suit the Prime Minister, because I think she is coming round to the belief that only if we have a not very Brexit is the thing going to get through the House of Commons and the House of Lords.
It's always somebody else's fault. The Irish, the civil servants, the EU, not the government's own ridiculous, badly thought through, undeliverable plan.
Which triggered Article 50 without knowing
what they were doing.
Yeah, but if you want to
I start the
people,
sentence and you finish it.
If you want to blame people, you should go back to blaming your constituents, about whom you used to be rather concerned and rather frightened. It is your constituents.
I've never been frightened of my constituents.
It is your constituents and many other people's constituents who voted for Brexit.
I know why they voted to leave.
And it is the government's duty. It is the government's duty to deliver Brexit. And apparently it is your idea and the idea of the House of Lords and lots of people within the
Conservative... To do it in a way that doesn't cause us terrible damage to the economy. No,
too
it's not.
frustrated.
You know, I would rather we weren't in this situation. Just because we've shot ourselves in one foot doesn't mean we have to kneecap ourselves in the other. So we need something that's going to work.
Well, beware the wrath of the electorate if you
I very much
if you do frustrate it.
I do, but I also believe in leadership and not making my constituents poorer.
Well,
except that all of the establishment, from the Treasury to the IMF, to the CBI, to the TUC, to the OECD, and Uncle Tom Cobley, I think, had a word as well in it, they all said to your constituencies that they would be poorer if they voted for Brexit. And they still voted for Brexit.
They voted because they were angry about immigration and that they didn't feel like things had changed. They weren't getting a fair crack,
but they still voted, even though all these so-called authorities told them.
No, they voted for change. They voted for
Well, they voted
things
for
to change.
Brexit. That was the change.
But the type wasn't. Nobody talked to me on the doorstep about Max Fack and the customs union.
No,
and
we'd
single
never even
market.
heard
They
of
wanted
that then.
change.
Let me come to the issue you raised earlier, Liz.
Yes.
It's my understanding that the government, not just mine, but a number of journalists for this, is cooking up a major spending initiative on NHS spending to coincide with the 70th anniversary. It will come out, I think, end of June, beginning of July. There's still an argument going on. The Treasury, as you would expect, still digging its heels in a bit. But it's going to be something like 3% a year in real terms for at least 5 years and maybe 10. That's partly where the Treasury is arguing as to how long to commit for that. And of course, with compound interest at 3% a year, it grows quite a lot. And interestingly, by 2020, I think, as we're out of the EU, it works out at around £300 million a year extra a week for the NHS. I wonder where that came from. It's quite good politics for the government, this, is it not?
Well, it's essential for the survival of the NHS. We really are at a crossroads, and if we don't see substantial extra investment, what you'll see is rationing by waiting times or rationing
we
by
already have
restricting
that.
it, and we do.
We always have,
But I want to be really clear about this. It's 4% real terms increase for 15 years that we need just to get us back to meeting waiting times.
Yeah, but the cost of that's
And
10p on income tax.
I understand that.
Well, you're never going to get that. through.
No, but there are different ways and different sources of funding, which is what I think we need to work across parties on. But crucially is there's nothing there on social care. And if you don't have the care that people
we don't
need
know that yet.
to keep them out of hospital or get them back out of hospital once they've been there, you cannot solve the NHS without solving the social care crisis. And we've heard nothing on that.
No, but we don't know yet because we haven't had the statement. Michael.
Well, this is to talk about the National Health Service in isolation. It's not to talk about, what the country can afford and where we're going. So, as we've been increasing spending on the National Health Service, spending on defence has dropped to a very low level, spending on education has gone down, spending on the police has gone down. The National Health Service has become an enormous thing that grows and grows and grows. The other budget that we don't really look at is welfare. And if we're going to allow both the National Health Service budget and the welfare budget to spiral out of control, then of course we're just never going to be able to afford this. Taxes are going to go up enormously.
But we've had big
The
welfare
economy is going to
cuts.
come juddering to a halt. Yeah, but the welfare bill has gone up.
Yeah, but at a slow rate of increase. Anyway, let's finish in a quick yes/no interlude. Is Mrs May still secure?
Yes, for the time being.
Is the Speaker still secure?
Yeah.
There you go. 2 yeses. Probably means they'll both be out of a job by the weekend.
Damn.
No, I think it's fair and uncontroversial to say that the best before dates of Michael and Liz expired some time ago. But there's life in them yet, especially when the drugs kick in, and we've had a whip round for a bit of nip and tuck. So are you really ever past your sell-by date? We don't know. Otherwise, we wouldn't still be peddling this muck for after 15 years. So we're putting sell-by in the spotlight. Tesco thinks sell-by dates have reached their expiration. But what's the difference between ripe and rotten? Food for thought for Marks and Sparks, who are closing 100 stores.
Their customers are shopping elsewhere. They're shopping online and they're shopping out of town.
Facebook certainly seemed best before we'd all heard of Cambridge Analytica. MEPs agreed.
it is time to discuss breaking Facebook monopoly, because it's already too much power in only one hand.
Every year you have one or other wrongdoing or problem with Facebook, and you have to face the reality and to say sorry and to say that you're going to fix it.
But does technology mean human doctors are approaching their sell-by date?
On Monday, I did announce that we will use data, artificial intelligence and innovation to transform the prevention, early diagnosis and treatment of chronic diseases by 2030.
Roman Abramovich is hoping an expired visa doesn't mean it's game over for him. And Kathy Lette doesn't think she's reached her sell-by date. But without a label, who could tell? And Kathy's with us now.
Hello.
I've been told to ask this question. I would never do it as a gentleman. Are you past your sell-by date?
No, definitely not.
No.
You might be, but...
Oh, I'm way by.
I'm feeling
Way
a little
by.
sorry for you on that count.
I'm not surprised. I'm quite sorry myself.
But we haven't passed our amuse-by date, and that's the important thing.
Is
We're
that
still
right?
witty, yeah.
What is a sell-by date? You know, it's interesting that this issue's come up on the basis of these things,
fruit,
the fruit and the food.
Tesco's, yeah.
But it raises a wider issue of some.
Yeah.
I've never trusted these sell-by things on the food.
Yeah. Well, listen, at least they've taken them off fruit and vegetables at Tesco's. But what my point is, why can't we give the same opportunity to women and stop throwing women on the compost heap once they turn 50? Because even last week we had Ben Broadbent, you know, who's the Deputy Governor.
Menopausal Broadbent.
Who said the economy was going through a menopausal phase.
Yes.
Meaning we'd passed our peak of productivity.
Yeah.
Just tell that to Angela Merkel, Oprah Winfrey, Madonna, Margaret Atwood.
He helpfully explained that's what he meant. Thereby digging an even deeper hole.
Even deeper hole.
Do you think
And-
these two are past the sell-by date? I mean, be honest, Kathy. You're
You
known...
definitely not. I think
Oh,
some of Michael's,
right.
I think
I like
some
the
of Michael's
implication of that.
policies are slightly, you know, in the dinosaur land. But what I would say the trouble for women is that we become invisible at 50. For example, 85% of people on British television over 50 are men.
Yeah.
And as good a broadcaster as you are, if you had an ovary, you'd be out of work right now.
How do you know I'm over 50?
You're approaching 50, but I'm not saying from which direction.
Oh, approaching 50.
From which direction, darling? You know. And the thing is that women suffer from facial prejudice. We get judged on our looks in a way that men don't. For women, wordplay is foreplay. How else is Woody Allen still getting laid, right?
Is he?
He likes to keep it
do
in
you
the
know that?
family, obviously.
How do you know that?
Yeah.
Are you behind the picture in his bedroom with the moving eyes?
But I'll
How do
tell you
know
what
these things?
has passed its use-by date
Yeah?
is misogyny.
Ah.
Because with Me Too and Time's Up, etc., 100 years since Emily Pankhurst tied herself to the railings, we still don't have equal pay. We're still getting concussion hitting our head on the glass ceiling, and we're supposed to clean it while we're up there for like half the pay they would get. So any woman who calls herself a post-feminist has kept her wonder bra and burnt her brains, because we still have a long way to go.
What do you say to that, Michael?
He's ovulating, I can tell, look.
I'm sure you've got a lot to comment on that.
I think part of it was true. It is certainly true that you and I, at our great age, don't find it very difficult to work in
Absolutely.
television, whereas women of our age would find it more difficult.
Yeah,
that is
right.
true.
Absolutely.
And it's not as though feminists are asking for a lot. We'd like equal pay. We'd like men to help
Not to be
around...
groped.
Not to be groped.
Yeah.
We'd like men to help around the house, because even though women make up 50% of the workforce, we're still doing about 99% of all the housework and childcare. And it's in men's interest, because it's scientifically proven that no woman ever shot her husband while he was vacuuming. So that's good. We'd like men to
How'd you know
work
that?
out...
That's very
well,
good.
I researched, darling.
That's
the
not true.
vacuuming, it's
That's
the
not true
ultimate-
when the Mistral is blowing.
Oh, really?
No.
Oh.
Many men have been shot by their wives when the Mistral is blowing.
He's got premenstrual syndrome. We'd
no,
like men...
Mistral. Not everything is menstrual. This is Mistral.
We'd like men to work out that the Kama Sutra is not an Indian takeaway, and that mutual orgasm's not an
not an Indian
insurance
takeaway?
company. And
it's not an Indian
it's just as well I'm here to educate you boys, isn't it?
When did that change?
Just as well, it's very late.
I don't even know what it is. Who to tell? I mean, from a lot of what you're saying, particularly in the female angle, it's men that are determining your sell-by date.
That's right.
really what you're saying.
That's right, because
not
men...
people themselves. I mean, people can decide themselves.
I mean, if there were more
But
women
that's not what-
directors, commissioners, then you might see more women of different ages.
Commissioners?
gatekeepers.
You mean in broadcasting?
Yeah. I
They're,
think-
they're nearly all commissioners. They're nearly all women, the commissioners.
In Hollywood, 95% of the
Exactly.
movies that come out of Hollywood have a male protagonist.
Yeah, but nobody watches Hollywood movies anymore.
Oh, I do.
You do?
So
What do
we
you watch?
need more women in.
What, Marvel Man?
No.
No, exactly. Do you think, should he determine his sell-by date himself?
I mean, it's
Or should a woman tell him that he's past his sell-by date?
Well, what do you think, Michael? Do you think you?
Oh,
might be
that's
past your-
a little-
Do you think you
hold
might be
on.
getting past your sell-by
Well,
date?
as I just said, in British television, the chances are that it will be a
Yeah.
woman who will tell me.
That's right. Yes. So yes, just give us
Well,
equal
so it's
pay.
changing a bit.
Well, look, even when you watch those TV shows, any comedy show, whatever, you know, it's always men on. There'll be all men and maybe one token female. Women are, you know, we're up the creek without a panel. We need our own panel show with one token bloke. I mean, even now it's two
Could
men
I-
and
could I
one
be-
woman as
could
the
I be
anchor.
that?
Token, you can. You can be our male sacrifice. You know, on a women's gathering, we
Sacrifice? You
always
want to sacrifice? I like
we
the
always strip a man naked, covered in whipped cream, and lick it slowly off. So if you're up
sort
for
of.
that.
Well, basically, just be a normal night in the
No,
south
not
of France.
yet.
Okay, very well. Well, I'll wait for the call. If I had an agent, he'd be waiting, or she.
She.
Yeah.
Thank you. Very good.
We're learning.
He's raising his consciousness slowly.
It's like walking on eggshells. Kathy, thank you very much. Good
What
to
about
see
my
you.
show? You didn't mention my show.
I didn't know you had one.
I'm doing a one-woman show in Edinburgh.
Oh,
That's
what,
right.
at the festival?
I am.
Well, that's fantastic.
As long as I don't fall out with the cast, it'll all be great.
Whereabouts?
Free
Which
tickets?
venue?
Oh, for you, always, darling.
Perfect.
And I'm at Hertford tomorrow.
Hearts.
Is that where
Tomorrow.
hurricanes hardly ever happen?
Yes. I don't know. I've never been
I'll
there.
be there tomorrow.
Very well. You
I had to
heard it here
drop my
first.
own name because I
There
thought you were going to drop it for me, but no. Even then, you see, no
I'm
help
going
for the
to-
girls.
Can I read this now?
You can read it.
Thank you very much. That's your lot for tonight, folks, but not for us. We're off to Lulu's, where, inspired by the Tory party's idea to attract new members with a discount card for Nando's, which I'm told is some kind of restaurant, the nightclub is offering a cut-price Blue Nun Royale to all This Week viewers. So get on down there. Technically, we're not viewers, but I think we'll get away with it. Nighty-night. Don't let Boris's prank call bite.
Hello?
Hello, good afternoon. It's Boris Johnson here.
Good afternoon, Foreign Secretary.
Prime Minister, may I congratulate you very sincerely on your remarkable success, and you can definitely count on the UK. And I admire your vision and what you're trying to achieve. Obviously, we had hoped to have better relations with Russia than we currently do. I'm afraid that Russia seems to be unable to resist malign activity of one kind or another.
As you know, I have a meeting with President Putin in Sochi. I hope he will not poison me with Novichok.
The UK is absolutely determined to stand firm against them, and we will continue to tighten the squeeze on some of the oligarchs who surround Putin. Yeah, you throw a stone in Kensington and you'll hit an oligarch.